Last set of notes, if you are going in the order that I listed them on Canvas, you don't always know what's true and what's false. We lie all the time. So I want you to just write down a couple of examples of white lies that you yourself have told. For example, I just got your text. Might be 2 hours ago and you didn't feel like replying or you wanted to get out of that thing, but we'll tell each other, I just got your text. Take another 30 seconds, jot down a couple white lies. Another one, sorry, I'm busy Friday night. Not really, but maybe you'd just rather waste time on Instagram than hang out with your friend. Or maybe you have better plans, or maybe you don't want to hurt someone's feelings. I promise I won't tag you, but it's a picture I look really great in, so I probably will tag you anyways. We say this stuff to each other all the time. So you don't believe everything you're told, or hopefully you don't believe everything you're told. And you shouldn't believe everything you're told by a narrator either. We are now reading literature that's so sophisticated that the authors want their characters, including their narrators, to act like real people, to act like real humans would act. And for some reason, I think we think that because it's literature, then everything in it must be taken very, very seriously, and very, very true. But the reality is, we can't always trust the people talking, and we really can't always trust our narrator. Just like when we read Huck Finn, when we talked about how Huck doesn't really understand what's going on sometimes because he's a little kid. We, as young adults and as adults, understand the significant amount of racism in the book. We understand the significant amount of weight and trouble that Huck is going through because he's best friends with an African American slave and he doesn't give up Jim. But we understand how significant that is. Huck doesn't as much. And that's what makes that book so good. It's coming from a child. Different in Gatsby, our narrator isn't a child, but he is unreliable in his own way. So let's talk about unreliable narration. We have what the author wants us to actually see. Mark Twain wants us to see the racism happening in the 1800s in the South and in America. He wants us to see that message. But then we have what the narrator is telling us. It'd be a way boringer book. Boringer is not a word, but I said it anyways. It would be a way more boring book if Mark Twain just had Huck say, everyone's racist except for me, which isn't even true in that book, but we have what the narrator's telling us. And then we have this little part in the middle. We need to fill in this intentional gap with our own inference. And this is where I think junior year gets very interesting in literature, because you guys are now sophisticated enough and smart enough to not fully believe everything you read. So in your notes where it says author equals narrator, I want you to put a big X through that equal sign. The author and the narrator are not the same. Huck Finn might not have understood the racism and the pressure and the societal pressure that he was feeling, but Mark Twain certainly did and wanted us to see that as an audience member. Why use an unreliable narrator? Well, first, it's fun. It's a very unconventional approach, it's a very smart approach, and it's hard to pull off in writing. So as you guys become more and more sophisticated readers, and if you ever take a class where there's writing involved and you write creatively, try using an unreliable narrator. It's very sophisticated, it's very unconventional. It's sometimes a surprise for the reader. If you've read more modern books, not Englishy literature-based books that you have to analyze a lot, but if you've read anything like Gone Girl or any of those spy thriller books, if you've seen, and I know Fourth Bell and I talked about this show a lot, if you've seen You, our narrator is a psychopath stalker. He thinks he's in love, but we know he's actually a stalker and he's obsessed. He has murdered people because he thinks that's protecting the girl, and in actuality, he's murdering people. He's a psychopath, stalker, murderer. You has an unreliable narrator. It's a fantastic show if you haven't seen it and you're interested in anything sort of thriller, crime-based, but it's a perfect example of an unreliable narrator. It also helps readers to understand the power of perspective. If you was told in the perspective of one of the other characters, like the girl's best friend Peach, for example, it would be a very, very, very different story. Or if Gone Girl was not told in the perspective of the woman who disappeared, it'd be a very different book. So, an example you know and one you don't. We have the true story of the Three Little Pigs. This is a short story children's book. We all know the story of the Three Little Pigs, but it's from the Big Bad Wolf's perspective. And if I had a couple extra weeks for this class, I would have us write our own flipped or changed perspectives of children, like famous children books. This would take you maybe 5 minutes to read, but it's really fantastic. This is a Japanese film, 1950. You guys do not need to watch this, but it is a great film. I believe it's on Netflix. And again, it has unreliable narration, and it's a flipped narration story. Moving on. So here are some types of unreliable narrators, and a lot of these we've already learned about. Liars and criminals. So Edgar Allan Poe, he does this in every single thing that he writes. Each narrator is some sort of psychopath or sociopath or murderer or crazed killer. For example, we read The Black Cat together. The Black Cat is killed by our narrator, who thinks he sees a second black cat, or maybe he does see a second black cat, and then he kills his wife, and this whole time he thinks he's normal. That's unreliable narration. It's coming from a liar and a criminal, and they don't see the problems in what they're doing, which of course would make them unreliable. Next, we have mentally ill. For example, Chief Ramjan, who is a schizophrenic and a mental ward patient from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is a fantastic, fantastic, fantastic movie. If you have not seen it, I highly recommend it. These two can be very, very similar, like narcissism and having a disdain for authority, but the narrators have very different motivations. So the reason a liar or criminal would lie and be unreliable would be on purpose. The reason someone with a mental illness would not be telling the truth would not be purposeful. So a liar and criminal is trying to get out of a crime, whereas mentally ill, if you're schizophrenic and you're having hallucinations that there are bats attacking you in this room, you're going to tell a different story than I will for this class, Belle. You're going to be talking a lot about bats, but you're not lying on purpose. You're still unreliable, but you're not lying. It's just because your perspective's different. We also have young, innocent, and inexperienced. If you read To Kill a Mockingbird your freshman year, you should know that Scout is unreliable because she's a child. Exact same with Huckleberry Finn. He's unreliable because he's a child. He doesn't fully understand the problems in society, though he spends the entire book fighting them. And then here's Nick Carraway. This is our narrator from The Great Gatsby. He has access only to a limited amount of information. So what is unreliable about Nick, but is also really interesting about Nick, is he's figuring out the story at the same time we are. He doesn't know the ending just like we don't know the ending. And because he has limited information, in chapter 1, he's going to believe certain things about certain characters. And then by chapter 9, the very end of the book, he's completely going to see a different view of the world. We also have books where the narrators can process only a limited amount of information. For example, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. You might have read this in 7th or 8th grade. The narrator is a 15-year-old boy with autism, and so his perspective is very, very different from the perspective of Nick Carraway or from the perspective of one of Poe's serial killers. It's a processing disorder, and so the narration is different, making it unreliable, but really interesting. Also, you might have read this book in 7th or 8th grade, Flowers for Algernon, story of a brain surgery experiment gone awry. Last, actions aren't consistent with what the narrator tells us. We will talk a ton about this when we read Catcher in the Rye, but the character will say one thing, he hates all phony people, and he will do another thing, and he will lie to all the people he sees. Again, we'll talk about that more later. So, we've already read Huck Finn. We don't have to go through this example, but you know that at the very, very beginning, Huck says this book was made by Mr. Mark Twain. He told the truth mainly. There's some things he stretched, but mainly he told the truth. That's nothing. I've never seen anybody but lied one time or another, meaning Huck's okay with lying. He's uncomfortable with lying. He knows everyone lies. He's going to lie to us too. He's also a little kid. More examples. Forrest Gump, this would be a processing disorder. Forrest sees the world in a different way from most people, which is what makes this movie so great and so lovable. I don't know anyone who doesn't like Forrest Gump, except for Mr. Pellissier, so you can give him a hard time about that if you have Mr. P. A Beautiful Mind, great movie. We have the main character who is schizophrenic, and he sees things. How I Met Your Mother. The whole time Ted Mosby knows the mother, but he's not telling us. So he's lying to us, and also we're uncovering the story. This TV series would not be that good if they just said, How I Met Your Mother is this way, end of the first episode, no more seasons to follow. And then lastly, Fight Club. Watch this movie. It's an incredible movie. I can't tell you anything about it, but it has an unreliable narrator. So, how can you know if a narrator is lying? You're going to read with a critical eye. Compare the narrator's words to his or her behavior. Are they saying one thing and doing another thing? That's going to be an unreliable narrator. Next, check new information against facts from earlier in the story. Again, look for any discrepancies. Does everything add up? Is everything as it should be? If the new information isn't the same as the old information, which one's fake? Apply what you already know about the world. This is our last one. You're young, but you know how the world works. You know about liars and cheaters and sociopaths. No one read The Black Cat and was like, yeah, I think he had a right to murder his wife and bury her in the wall. So make sure with The Great Gatsby, you are reading with that same critical eye. And your instinct is probably correct if you think there might be a lie happening. So that's it. End of our last set of notes. Hopefully you went in the same order. Not that it matters, but it will feel good to be done. Again, once you finish all the notes, and I'm finishing every video up like this, but once you're finished with your notes, please show them to me. Go back and find any answers that you didn't have. Show them to me, and then take the quiz on Canvas over Unreliable Narration, Modernism, and The Great Gatsby.